jaw, it appears, after fighting Anthony Joshua, right? I made this graphic for you guys. You see it. Got his jaw broken in 2 places.
Care of me forever and ever, little fucked up. But when you take care of me forever and ever, little fucked up. But when you take care of me
Jake Paul just got his jaw broken in 2 places by Anthony Joshua. And what I'm about to show you is way worse than anyone's talking about. This wasn't just a knockout. This was a complete destruction that left Jake hospitalized, bleeding, and facing the brutal reality that all his internet hype means absolutely nothing when you step in the ring with a real heavyweight champion.
Jaw in 2 places, and I'm about to show you the x-ray in a second, but firstly, let's watch the knockout. Right there, straight on the jaw, straight on the money. Even Jake Paul could not believe what happened.
Here's what actually went down, and trust me, the footage is hard to watch. Anthony Joshua didn't just land a punch. He delivered a calculated, devastating blow that snapped Jake's jaw in not 1, but 2 separate places. We're talking about x-rays that show fractures so severe that doctors had to rush Jake straight to the hospital. This is the same guy who's been running his mouth for months, posting training videos, acting like he belonged in the same ring as AJ. But when that final punch connected, you could literally see the moment Jake's entire persona crumbled. His legs gave out, his eyes rolled back, and suddenly all that YouTube bravado disappeared faster than his consciousness.
He's safe, and more so that he showed his heart. I don't know if you guys were looking on Twitter, but until about 20 minutes ago, the #1 trending thing on Twitter wasn't Jake Paul getting knocked out, wasn't Jake Paul, wasn't Anthony Joshua. It literally was the phrase, respect.
But here's where it gets absolutely wild. Jake's team knew this was coming. They had to know weeks ago that their fighter was walking into a slaughter, yet they let him go through with it anyway. They let the promotion keep advertising this as some kind of competitive fight. They let fans spend their hard-earned money on pay-per-view, thinking they were about to witness an actual contest. Instead, what we got was a masterclass in how internet fame gets you absolutely nowhere when you're facing legitimate heavyweight power. And the worst part? Jake's corner could have stopped this disaster at any point, but they let their cash cow get butchered on live television.
It wasn't a fight, was it? It really one-sided. Jake Paul, yeah, I've got to give him credit really because he's super fit. He's pretty clever really. Like he made you could.
Now listen to this part, because it reveals everything about what's really happening in boxing right now. Anthony Joshua wasn't even at his best that night. Multiple experts are saying AJ looked sluggish, maybe 70% of his usual self, and he still demolished Jake Paul like he was sparring with an amateur. David Haye, a former heavyweight champion himself, admitted that Jake had some kind of game plan going in, but it fell apart the second he felt AJ's power. We're talking about a guy who thought fancy footwork and YouTube training camps could prepare him for someone who's been perfecting the art of breaking jaws for over a decade. The delusion is honestly staggering.
But as we saw tonight, Jake has spirit. He has some heart. He tried his best, and I take my hat off to him because, number one, a lot of fighters haven't got in the ring with me.
Hold up, because Jake's manager Darian is out here trying to spin this catastrophe into some kind of moral victory, and it's absolutely ridiculous. He's talking about Jake showing heart and resilience for getting back up after being dropped. But let's be real about what we actually witnessed. Jake didn't show heart. He showed what happens when someone's completely out of their depth and too stubborn to stay down. Every time he got up, AJ just teed off on him again. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, except the car kept trying to drive after the engine exploded. This wasn't inspiring. This was painful to watch, and anyone pretending otherwise is lying to themselves.
British fight fans, because we've got a chance to make the biggest fight in boxing, but, you know, if that is the last we see of him, he had a great career. I doubt it. But, you know, it's always best to come into retirement to make sure someone pays you to come out.
And get this, the internet's reaction has been absolutely savage. And honestly, Jake brought every bit of it on himself. We're talking about memes flooding every platform, showing the exact moment his jaw got rearranged. The guy who built his entire brand on talking trash and acting invincible just got exposed in front of millions of people. His Twitter mentions are a wasteland of people reminding him that real boxing isn't like his scripted YouTube fights. Even his own fans are starting to turn, questioning whether Jake actually believed his own hype or if he knew he was walking into a beating and did it anyway for the payday.
Through a punch, I like wince because he's a big man and he's an incredible boxer and he's still in his prime and he's got a very long reach and he's got a lot of power in that right hand and that left hook is terrifying.
But wait, it gets worse. Logan Paul, Jake's own brother, is out here trying to damage control this disaster, and his comments are making everything even more embarrassing. He's calling Jake's performance courageous and praising him for surviving against AJ. Surviving. The man got his face rearranged and ended up in a hospital bed with his jaw wired shut. That's not survival. That's what happens when you mistake YouTube views for actual fighting ability. Logan's trying so hard to protect his brother's brand that he's making Jake look even more delusional. Because if getting brutally knocked out and hospitalized is now considered a victory, then we've officially lost all perspective on what professional boxing actually is.
Everyone was expecting it. It's very difficult to pin someone down when they're not trying to engage. Jake's game plan was a good one, was to use lateral movement and hope to land a big overhand right at some stage to catch AJ off guard. Didn't quite work out, but you got to give Jake credit. Took some big shots there. I think he's got a broken jaw or some spitting blood at the end of the fight. No, anything's possible. He gave it a go. He dared to be great. Didn't work out for him, understandably. That's why he was such a massive...
Here's the kicker that nobody's talking about, though. This fight wasn't really about Jake Paul at all. It was about Anthony Joshua proving he's still got that devastating power that made him a champion. AJ needed to remind the boxing world that he's not washed up, that he's still a legitimate threat in the heavyweight division. And what better way to do that than by absolutely demolishing the internet's favorite fake fighter? Jake was never the opponent, he was the sacrifice. AJ used him as a human highlight reel to send a message to every real heavyweight out there. The scary part? It worked perfectly. Every top heavyweight just watched AJ break someone's face with surgical precision, and they're all taking notes.
Tough guy in there. Obviously, he moved a lot and made it difficult for AJ. And AJ's been out of the ring for a while. He's a bit rusty. It took him time to just get hold of him.
You know what's really insane about this whole situation? The people around Jake are still trying to book him more fights. His team is already talking about his next challenge and how this loss will motivate him to come back stronger. Come back stronger. The man can barely speak through his wired jaw, and they're already planning his next beating. This is what happens when everyone around a fighter cares more about the money than the person. Jake's not a boxer. He's a content creator who got convinced he could fight because he knocked out some retired basketball players and washed-up MMA fighters. But Anthony Joshua just gave him a reality check that's going to echo for the rest of his career.
No one expected him to last that long. Rolled his ankle, broke his jaw, still fucking fighting, man. Like, that's toughness. You know, most people...
And here's something that's really bothering me about how this whole thing went down. The Boxing Commission let this fight happen. They looked at Jake Paul's record, a bunch of wins against non-boxers and social media personalities, and decided he was ready for a legitimate heavyweight champion. That's not matchmaking, that's sanctioned violence. Someone with actual authority should have stepped in and said this fight was too dangerous to allow. But instead, they rubber-stamped it because they knew it would generate massive pay-per-view numbers. They sacrificed Jake's safety for profit, and now he's the one paying the price with a shattered jaw and a destroyed reputation.
Jake fought a very, how do I survive long enough to land a right hand type of fight, and it made it a little difficult for AJ to get his timing. No excuses. AJ didn't look great. I'll be honest. He didn't look great. He didn't look like, an AJ we thought we were going to get, the marauder, the guy that was going to come forward and bang out Jake in one round.
The medical reports are even more disturbing than what we saw on camera. Jake didn't just get knocked out. He suffered what doctors are calling severe facial trauma that required immediate surgery. We're talking about fractures so bad that they had to insert metal plates just to hold his jaw together. This isn't the kind of injury you bounce back from in a few months. This is career-altering damage that's going to affect how Jake talks, eats, and potentially even thinks for the rest of his life. And for what? So he could prove he belonged in a ring where he clearly had no business being. The cost-benefit analysis here is absolutely insane. But here's what nobody's asking. Where do we go from here? Jake's built his entire brand on being this fearless fighter who will take on anyone, anywhere. But how do you maintain that image when the whole world just watched you get your jaw broken by a real boxer? His YouTube channel, his merchandise, his whole persona was built on the illusion that he was some kind of legitimate fighter. That illusion is now lying in pieces on the canvas of that arena, along with fragments of his jawbone. His team can try to spin this however they want, but you can't unsee someone getting their face rearranged on live television. So there you have it. Jake Paul walked into that ring thinking he was a fighter and walked out on a stretcher learning he's still just a YouTuber with delusions of grandeur. Anthony Joshua reminded everyone why he's a former world champion, and Jake got a lesson in reality that cost him his jaw, his reputation, and probably his boxing career. This wasn't just a fight, it was a public execution of everything Jake thought he knew about himself. And honestly, maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. So here's my question for you, drop it in the comments. Do you think Jake will ever step foot in a boxing ring again after this, or is this the reality check that finally ends his fighting fantasy? If this breakdown showed you just how brutal real boxing can be, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell because the fallout from this disaster is just getting started. I'll see you in the next one. Now here's where things get absolutely crazy, and this is information that's just starting to leak out from people close to the situation. Jake's camp apparently knew about Anthony Joshua's specific training regimen leading up to this fight, and what they discovered should have been enough to cancel everything immediately. AJ wasn't just preparing for a regular fight, he was training specifically to end careers. His sparring partners were reporting that Joshua was throwing combinations they'd never seen before, targeting the jaw with surgical precision. One insider told me that AJ's trainer was literally studying footage of Jake's defensive weaknesses, mapping out exactly where and how to land that fight-ending blow. This wasn't just preparation, this was premeditation. And get this, the sparring footage from Jake's camp tells a completely different story than what his team was showing the public. While they were posting highlight reels of Jake looking sharp against hand-picked opponents, the real training sessions were apparently disasters. Multiple sources are saying Jake was getting dropped regularly by sparring partners who wouldn't even qualify as professional boxers. His own team was watching him get hurt in practice, yet they still let him walk into that ring with Anthony Joshua. That's not management, that's negligence bordering on criminal. They knew their fighter was nowhere near ready, but the payday was too big to pass up. But wait, because there's another layer to this that makes everything even more disturbing. The betting patterns on this fight were absolutely bizarre, and now we're starting to understand why. Sharp money, the kind that comes from people who know something, was hammering Anthony Joshua by knockout in the early rounds. We're talking about massive bets placed just days before the fight, suggesting that word was already out about Jake's condition and readiness. Someone with inside information was making serious money, while Jake was walking into what essentially amounted to a public beating. The whole thing stinks of people profiting off what they knew was going to be a one-sided destruction. Here's something that's really eating at me, though. Jake's younger fans, the kids who look up to him, had to watch their hero get absolutely brutalized on live television. We're talking about children who believed in Jake's invincibility, suddenly seeing him unconscious, bleeding, and being carried out on a stretcher. That kind of image doesn't just disappear from a young person's mind. These kids invested emotionally in Jake's success, bought his merchandise, defended him online, and their reward was witnessing him get his jaw broken in real time. The psychological impact of that betrayal is something nobody's even talking about, but it's probably the most damaging part of this entire disaster. And the medical details keep getting worse as more information comes out. The initial reports said Jake's jaw was broken in 2 places, but new details suggest the damage was even more extensive. We're hearing about nerve damage that could affect his ability to speak clearly for months, maybe permanently. Dental work that's going to require multiple surgeries. Potential brain trauma that the doctors are still evaluating. This isn't just a boxing injury. This is life-altering damage that's going to follow Jake for decades. Every meal he eats, every word he speaks, every time he looks in the mirror, he's going to be reminded of the night Anthony Joshua destroyed his entire worldview. Now here's where the story takes an even darker turn, and this information is coming from people who were actually backstage that night. Jake's team was apparently in full panic mode hours before the fight even started. His head trainer was overheard telling someone on the phone that Jake looked completely shot during the final warm-up. His hands were shaking, He couldn't focus on basic combinations, and he kept asking how much money they'd lose if they pulled out. That's not pre-fight nerves. That's someone who knows they're walking into a slaughter and can't find a way out. The fact that nobody stepped in to protect him at that moment tells you everything about what his team's real priorities were. But here's what's really blowing my mind about Anthony Joshua's performance that night. Multiple boxing analysts are now saying that AJ was actually holding back for most of the fight. The punch that broke Jake's jaw? That wasn't even thrown at full power. Joshua was apparently playing with his food, letting Jake think he had a chance before deciding to end it. One former heavyweight champion told me that if AJ had been trying to hurt Jake from the opening bell, the fight would have been stopped in the first round. Instead, he chose to make it educational, showing Jake and everyone watching exactly how outclassed he really was before delivering the final lesson. And the ripple effects of this destruction are already starting to hit the entire influencer boxing scene. Promoters who were lining up celebrity matches are suddenly having second thoughts about putting untrained internet personalities in rings with real fighters. Insurance companies are reportedly reviewing their policies for these kinds of mismatched spectacles. Athletic commissions are facing serious pressure to implement stricter qualification standards. Jake's broken jaw might have just broken the entire model of YouTuber boxing, because nobody wants to be responsible for the next hospitalization when someone gets in over their head. Here's something absolutely wild that's emerging from the post-fight analysis. Video breakdown specialists are finding details in the footage that make Jake's performance look even worse than it appeared live. Frame-by-frame analysis shows that Jake was hurt much earlier in the fight than anyone realized. His legs were compromised, his guard was dropping, and he was essentially a walking target for several rounds before Joshua decided to put him out of his misery. The punch that broke his jaw was just the exclamation point on a beating that had been building for the entire fight. Jake wasn't competitive for a single minute. He was just surviving until AJ got bored and ended it. Now let's talk about the absolutely savage response from the professional boxing community, because these guys are not holding back at all. Heavyweight contenders who previously wouldn't even acknowledge Jake's existence are now using him as a punchline in interviews. One top-ranked fighter said watching Jake get knocked out was like watching someone learn why you don't bring a water gun to a gunfight. Another called it educational television that should be shown to every influencer who thinks they can buy their way into boxing credibility. The disrespect is brutal, but honestly, Jake earned every bit of it by talking like he belonged in their world. But here's the part that's really got me questioning everything about this situation. Jake's social media has gone completely dark since the fight. No posts, no stories, no responses to the thousands of people tagging him. For someone whose entire career is built on constant content creation and engagement, this silence is deafening. His team is putting out generic statements about recovery and gratitude, but Jake himself has vanished from the platforms that made him famous. That tells me the psychological damage from this beating might be even worse than the physical trauma. When someone's entire identity gets shattered in front of millions of people, coming back from that isn't just about healing a broken jaw. And get this, the financial implications of this disaster are absolutely staggering, and they go way beyond just the fight purse. Jake's endorsement deals are reportedly being reviewed by nervous sponsors who don't want their brands associated with someone getting brutalized on television. His merchandise sales have apparently crashed because nobody wants to wear the gear of someone who just got exposed as a fraud. The YouTube algorithm is already shifting away from his content because engagement has plummeted since people saw him get knocked unconscious. This one fight didn't just break Jake's jaw, it might have broken his entire business model. Here's something that's really bothering me about the aftermath coverage, though. Some media outlets are trying to frame this as a learning experience or a stepping stone in Jake's boxing journey. Learning experience. The man got his face rearranged and ended up in intensive care. That's not education. That's what happens when delusion meets reality at high speed. There's no stepping stone that leads from getting your jaw broken in 2 places to becoming a legitimate heavyweight contender. The gap between where Jake is and where he pretended to be isn't something you bridge with training and motivation. It's a chasm that can only be crossed by admitting you never belonged on the other side in the first place. But wait, because there's another angle to this story that's even more disturbing when you really think about it. Jake Paul has been inspiring other influencers and content creators to think they can transition into professional fighting. His success against non-boxers created this entire ecosystem of internet personalities who started believing they could compete in combat sports. Now those same people just watched their role model get hospitalized by a real fighter. The message is crystal clear: stay in your lane or end up on a stretcher. That's probably the most valuable lesson to come out of this entire disaster, even though it came at the cost of Jake's health and dignity. The most insane part about all of this, Jake's team is already trying to negotiate his next fight. I'm not kidding. While he's sitting in a hospital bed with his jaw wired shut, his management is reportedly fielding offers for his comeback bout. They're talking about taking easier opponents, building him back up, restoring confidence. But how do you restore confidence after the entire world watched you get knocked into next week by Anthony Joshua? How do you convince people you're a fighter when the last image they have of you is being carried out unconscious? The cognitive dissonance here is absolutely mind-blowing.